So I'm meeting with Nancy, the president of WACE. We're on Microsoft Teams at the moment. I'm meeting with Nancy, the president of WACE. And I really appreciate the time, Nancy. Obviously, for all kinds of reasons, you're not able to be with us live. And so you've agreed to have this video recording. So we really appreciate your time. And that's brilliant and absolutely excellent. So you are the president of WACE. WACE, deodorant? I mean, what is this? Tell us a little bit more.
Hi. Well, first of all, I was the president of WACE when I began writing the chapter. I'm now past president of WACE, and WACE is an acronym for the World Association for Cooperative and Work Integrated Education. So you can see why we refer to it as WACE, since it's such a mouthful. But essentially, it's the global network for educators, employers, researchers who are interested in the development of work integrated learning as a primary approach, educational approach, particularly in the tertiary sector, that allows students to learn in place within a workplace to kind of bring to life some of the more academic classroom-based learning, and also to imbue them with skills and knowledge that we know to be relevant to employability, so that when they graduate, they have their academic credentials, and it's been bolstered by these experiences out in the workplace in an effort to help prepare them understand how to apply some of what they've learned in school. And of course, naturally, they will be applying some of what they learn in the workplace as they move back and forth between the academic environment and the workplace environments. And so that's what work integrated learning within the WACE context is about. And this association works with the networks that are in existence all around the world and sort of brings them together for a more global view of how this model might progress on a world front.
So tell us a little bit more how WACE brings all of these together. What's the conversation that is being had across these various, areas around the world?
Sure. Well, historically, and for the past 25 years, WACE has sort of used two major activities to get together, and we've always found that our face-to-face gatherings through our World Conference and through our research symposia, and they would happen on alternate years. We bring together all the people that are parts of national or regional associations around the world, or parts of institutions who are big work integrated learning forces around the world. And we would come and meet face to face at some wonderful host locations around the globe. And we were actually set to meet at the University of Limerick for our International Research Symposium last June. And of course, in March, April, it became abundantly clear that COVID was going to be taking over all of our lives as it has. So in answer to your question now, we very quickly, like many associations, pivoted and have moved to an online environment. We currently are holding what we call global conversations on a regular basis, webinars on specific topics. Of course, the first ones were, what happens with work integrated learning in a COVID environment? And we have a large conference coming up, our first ever virtual World Conference in May 11-12. We're hosting that. So everything, like most people, has moved to the online environment. And we have many active committees and so on that encourage people to get together. One of our most active is our national associations committees, to which 8 or 9 national associations now get together and talk about, okay, what's happening in South Africa, what's happening in New Zealand, the US, Canada, Europe. So those are largely right now the mechanisms at play, all virtual, as you and I are today, but still making the important connections so that all parts of the world kind of know what is happening and how we're managing and sharing that intelligence and those resources.
Brilliant. And I know this conference is happening towards the end of April, so maybe there's still time for those who are listening to this to sign up and go to that virtual conference.
Thank you.
The contribution that you've made in the chapter is talking about the WACE Charter. So tell us about that.
Sure. So a couple of years ago, WACE had engaged in a fairly significant strategic planning exercise. And given the nature of having to talk to everyone around the world and then distill that into some kind of document. It went over about a year and a half. We had a lot of input and a lot of separate exercises at conferences virtually. And the charter actually became the first document that resulted from that said, okay, this is the way forward for this association for the next short while. And so it was a document that evolved out of us looking at what our strengths were, where our vulnerabilities were, where the gaps were in terms of us wanting to represent better some parts of the world that hadn't perhaps been historically part of the WACE community. And we decided to do this charter that said, here's why work integrated education is important and here's what it can do. And we linked it to some of the UN sustainability goals and to some of the work that UNESCO and others were doing, wherein education was specified as a tool, as a mechanism for the kinds of large global changes like equitable access to good education, like women having access to the same sorts of privileges as their counterparts. And so we nestled some of the charter goals there. But fundamentally, we looked at kind of 3 challenges that we saw in education that we felt work integrated learning was an approach, a very specific approach to education that was going to have the most effective outcomes. And those challenges were the reported skills gap, which we hear about all the time. Students graduate and they lack the knowledge and the skills to really fill the needs of employers. We also articulated the need for more intercultural training and, ironically, this notion of a more borderless world, and that people needed to be able to work seamlessly across boundaries, some of which were physical borders, but more intercultural and perhaps linguistically based boundaries. So the need to have all our grads, no matter where they're graduating from in the world, have the ability to work with and communicate effectively with people from different cultures and languages. And then the third one was really looking at that equitable access piece and what we might be able to do around that piece for all of our graduates. And then the last one was the fact that employers continually tell us that industry and business and even governments move faster typically than educational systems. And so there seems to be a time lag between what is needed in the just-in-time real world and by the time educational systems respond. And so what can we do to shorten that gap? And so as you might imagine, work integrated learning, where people are in and out of both systems in real time, addresses that. Work integrated learning addresses issues of equity and access and has the ability to do even better than that. Work integrated learning, at least in the World Association sense, involves thousands of students moving between countries, between cultures, between languages, working on shared projects. And the skills gap, obviously, that people report could be addressed in real time as students complete their credentials by having these intermittent opportunities to learn in a different context, such as a workplace. So as you can imagine, the challenges that we articulated were nicely situated to result in 3 calls to action, which I can tell you about a little bit later. But that's sort of what the charter is doing for us now, and what the world has told us, that everybody, regardless of where they are, faces those challenges of skills gaps and time gaps and knowledge gaps. And so we thought, okay, what can WACE do to address those?
Brilliant. I've had the privilege of being part of one of your conversations on CWIE, the cultural quota, and I can now kind of understand that within the framework of the charter. I'm still surprised, Nancy, that for us, I guess, working in work integrated learning, I can't understand how education cannot be work integrated, right? And we have to almost, in a sense, fly the flag for this. Now, the book potentially is wanting to address the new emerging labor force that is entering now, Gen Y and Gen Z. And clearly, I think as practitioners, we're wanting to ensure that we are progressing in the way in which education is preparing them, not just only for the workplace, but just preparing them for the adult world, which is very different from 20 years ago. Things are radically shifting, and what we've gone through in COVID, who would have imagined? So how does the chapter and the charter address these emerging challenges from your perspective as the author?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The whole generational lens is an interesting one. But certainly when you have a model fundamentally like work integrated learning that places people from multiple generations in one place, in this case, the workplace. So you've got Gen X, you've got Gen Y, you've got Gen Zs. They each have a role within this model. Typically, we've now got a Gen X supervisor. We may have a Gen Y colleague and a Gen Z student from a work integrated learning program, working together and learning together, quite frankly, around a shared purpose. And the really beautiful piece of this, because you could say, well, that might describe working with a graduate, but the really beautiful piece of this is that work integrated learning is a learning model. And so everybody that's playing understands that this is a learning environment and that there's reciprocity, it's fair to ask questions, we're all learning as part of this. It's actually, there's a formalized reflection piece, self-evaluation, peer evaluation, supervisor evaluation. So there are many conversations embedded in the model that work wonderfully to address issues like the generational issues that the book addresses. So we know that there are similarities between and amongst these generations, and we know that there are some differences, and it's sort of the intersection and the ways in which those connect that make those either problematic or wonderfully, mutually reinforcing. And so we're proposing through this chapter and through the scaling up of work integrated learning around the world that this particular model of education brings these multi-generations together in ways that are productive, in ways that they have an immediate shared concern, what they're trying to do at work, and within a learning environment that can prompt the sorts of conversations which are necessary to address any of the intergenerational frictions that might be there, or to promote the intergenerational good works that are happening because of the intersections of the traits that have been ascribed. So the reason that I felt the charter fit so nicely into the book is because it said this model is effective, but imagine it at the world scale where it's even more effective, not on just intergenerational, but intercultural and interlinguistic level, interregional, so that it's a model that, whilst addressing intergenerational challenges, is also addressing these in the real world context that most of us are working in. And that is with people who come from different countries, who may have studied or learned or lived in different cultures, and with whom we work daily, because many of us work for companies that are multicultural. Many of us live in very heavy receiving areas of new immigrants. I'm in Vancouver, Canada, and most of our workplaces that our students work in, and my own university, is exceedingly multicultural. So even in a world where we're all shut in place with COVID, these requirements are necessary because most of us are living, or many of us are living, in a very multicultural, multi-generational context.
Wow. I'm sure the listeners are thinking we need to purchase this book and particularly read that chapter in the book. You mentioned earlier on that you wanted to talk about, forgive me, I couldn't remember the three outcomes, the three...
Yeah, we called them calls to action, Trevor.
That's it, yeah. Calls to action. Would you mind finishing up on that one in terms of the three calls to action?
They would be wonderful. So we, in response to the challenges that we talked about earlier, we then proposed the WACE Secretariat three things that we thought uniquely WACE might be positioned to do. As you'll remember, we talked about how do we prepare students for this borderless work environment so that they can seamlessly span boundaries, whatever kinds of boundaries they might be. And what could we do before they graduate that would help them be better and more effective at that, and know that they're good at that. And so one of the calls to action is to develop this set of resources which focuses on equity, diversity, and inclusion largely, and to really promote an awareness and the development of each individual contributor's intercultural fluency, so that we could, with confidence, say through work integrated learning, our graduates are more aware of their own positionality, are more aware of how to work effectively, and that differences are not always bad, and how to work through them. And so to give students not just the skills, but the opportunity to practice those skills, and then the ability, we hope, upon graduation to know what they know and know what they don't know. So the first call to action would be to develop this set of intercultural resources, which could be delivered at the post-secondary or tertiary level prior to graduation, hopefully prior to these multiple work experiences that they're going to have. We also wanted, quite bluntly and simply, to scale up the number of opportunities for students to have an international experience. Now, we were thinking when we very first did the charter that these would be face-to-face exchanges, which WACE was going to facilitate, and there may be still some of those. We, of course, quickly pivoted, as everyone did, and now we're looking at how can these happen virtually. And one of the neatest programs that WACE is piloted and now looking to kind of formalize as part of the suite of offerings is a 3-week-long experience working for a not-for-profit. The first one we did was around the UN Sustainability Goals. We worked with Practira, which is an LMS system out of Australia, and we had 8 teams of students from 8 different universities working with these not-for-profit groups on real-world problems for them. And it was a 3-week immersive experience. And we did a little intercultural piece at the front end and a little intercultural and reflective debriefing at the back end. And we were so thrilled with the learning outcomes and the participation and what the students told us they gained from talking with someone in Africa, Germany, Canada, the United States, Australia on these teams, and bringing these multicultural lenses and just having this opportunity, all mediated through the Practira platform. So none of these people met face to face, but had this still a wonderful intercultural experience. So that's one of the suites that we're adding now. But the hope is that we will scale up work integrated learning in all its forms and through all its possible ways more in the future. So that was number 2. And then the last one is, as work integrated learning is really gaining a lot of traction around the globe in developed and developing countries, we want to make sure that the tenets of quality work integrated learning, the things that we know must be part of the design of a program to get the sorts of outcomes that we have seen in the last 100 years or so of the research in this area. And so we're looking at trying to develop with employers and educators around the world a quality framework, a global quality framework. There are at least a half a dozen good quality frameworks for work integrated learning in the world right now, if not a dozen, some quite contemporary. We want to get one that resonates so that we could say around the world, if you're developing work integrated learning programs, here are the 5-6 things you want to make sure are included in the design and the delivery of that program, so that you can say with confidence that the outcomes that we've found from programs that have these are the outcomes that you will get from your program. So quality framework.
Brilliant. I think you've done an excellent job, not only promoting the chapter in the book, but also actually what WACE is doing and the input that they're giving in terms of work integrated learning from around the globe. So thank you very much for your time. And we appreciate you just sharing the contribution that you've made for the chapter and giving a bit of a context to that. I'm sure if people would like to get into contact with you for further questions, that you would be happy to receive those emails through the WACE email networks and so on, and for them to join and be a part of this as well. So
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Trevor, for the opportunity and for handling this book and making sure it comes out. I think it could never have been more timely than now. And we would absolutely love to have anyone that's watching this take a look at waceinc.org. So WACEINC.org, and join us. We have a commitment to bring as many people in. And so I think you'll find the membership fees are very, very accessible. And there's a number of things you might just want to have a look at. So I wish everyone at this kickoff launch conference to have a wonderful time, and invite you to join our network, because clearly we're interested in very similar things.
Thank you.